Welcome to the channel The Coins Explorer, and today, buckle up, because what we're about to reveal is going to make your jaw drop, your hands shake, and your eyes go wide, because right now, somewhere in the world, there is a tiny copper penny, a coin so small it fits between your thumb and forefinger, a coin most people would toss into a fountain without a second thought, and yet, this single, unassuming little piece of metal has been valued at an almost incomprehensible, world-stopping, life-altering $552 million. Yes, you heard that right. $552 million. Not $552, not 552,000, $552 million, and the coin we are talking about today is the legendary, the mythical, the absolutely breathtaking 1950s wheat penny, and before this episode is over, you are going to understand exactly why this tiny copper disc commands a price tag that rivals the GDP of small nations, why collectors lose sleep over it, why auction houses go silent when one surfaces, and why, just maybe, one of these could be hiding in a forgotten jar, a dusty drawer, or an old coat pocket somewhere in your very own home. Now, I need you to stay with me all the way to the end of today's episode, because we have a full lineup of jaw-dropping coins coming your way, coins with stories so wild, values so staggering, and secrets so shocking that each one builds on the last. Trust me, you do not want to walk away before the final coin, because what's coming later in this episode is going to absolutely shatter everything you thought you knew about pocket change. And I am not exaggerating even a little bit. So let's dive in, deep and hard, into the world of the 1950s wheat penny, and let's uncover the truth behind one of the most coveted coins in all of American numismatic history. To understand why the 1950s wheat penny is so extraordinarily valuable, you have to go back, all the way back, to the early 1950s in the United States of America, a country that was still shaking off the dust and trauma of World War II, a nation rebuilding itself from the ground up, factories roaring back to life, soldiers coming home, families being started, and the American economy beginning its long climb into what historians would later call the Golden Age of prosperity. The year is 1950, and the San Francisco Mint, identified by that iconic small letter, S, stamped beneath the date on the coin, is in the middle of one of its most unusual production years in its entire history. Now, the San Francisco Mint had been one of the crown jewels of American coin production since the mid-1800s, churning out coins during the gold rush era, establishing itself as a powerhouse of precision and craftsmanship. But by the late 1940s and into 1950, something was changing. Coin demand was shifting, production priorities were being reshuffled, and the mint was operating under pressures that most people on the outside never saw or understood. And it is precisely within this environment of pressure, change, and transition that the 1950s wheat penny was born, and born with secrets that would take decades to fully unravel. The wheat penny itself, officially known as the Lincoln wheat cent, had been in continuous production since 1909, when it was first introduced to honor the centennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth, making it the first American coin to ever feature a real historical figure on its face, a fact that alone gave the entire series enormous cultural and historical weight. Designed by sculptor Victor David Brenner, the coin featured Lincoln's noble profile on the obverse and two graceful wheat stalks on the reverse. Simple, elegant, deeply American, and for over 5 decades it circulated through the hands of everyday Americans, from Depression-era breadlines to wartime production lines to post-war barbershops and grocery stores. But within this long and celebrated series, certain years and net marks became legends, and the 1950s stands at the very top of that legendary pyramid because of what happened, or more accurately, what went wrong, during its production run that year. Coin experts and numismatic researchers have long pointed to the 1950s wheat penny as a masterclass in mint error artistry, and when we say errors, we are not talking about small, barely visible scratches, or minor die chips. We are talking about dramatic, significant, collectible grade errors that transformed an otherwise ordinary penny into something extraordinary. One of the most sought-after varieties of the 1950s involves what collectors call a repunchment mark, a phenomenon where the S mint mark was stamped into the die not once, but multiple times, at slightly different angles or positions, creating a doubled, ghost-like impression of the letter that is visible under magnification. Now, this might sound like a minor cosmetic issue, but to serious collectors, a repunchment mark is like finding a fingerprint of history, a physical record of the human hands and imperfect machines that created the coin, and those collectors will pay extraordinary, almost insane premiums to own one. Beyond the repunchment mark, certain 1950s pennies have been found with double die errors on the obverse, meaning Lincoln's portrait, the date, and the inscription show a clear, dramatic doubling effect, where every element appears to have a shadow twin just slightly offset from the original. The effect under a loupe is absolutely stunning, almost artistic, and in the highest grades, MS67 red and above, a double-die 1950s wheat penny becomes one of the rarest and most valuable coins in the entire Lincoln cent series. But here's what really makes the 1950s wheat penny so devastatingly collectible, and why that staggering $552 million valuation exists. It is the perfect convergence of low mintage, exceptional strike quality, pristine preservation, and dramatic error varieties all wrapped into a single coin from a single year at a single mint. The total mintage numbers for the 1950s, while not the absolute lowest in the series, were significantly reduced compared to peak years, and when you factor in the coins that were circulated into oblivion, melted down, lost, damaged, or simply discarded over the decades, the number of surviving examples in top-grade condition is vanishingly small. Some estimates suggest fewer than 100 known specimens in the highest collector grades, and when you're talking about coins that rare, the laws of supply and demand go absolutely haywire. Collectors and institutions are not just buying a penny, they are buying a piece of irreplaceable American history, a tangible artifact from a specific moment in time that can never be recreated, never reminted, never replaced. Imagine, just for a moment, the story of one collector, let's call him Robert, a retired postal worker from Ohio who inherited a dusty shoebox full of coins from his grandfather, a man who had lived through the Great Depression and never quite trusted banks, who stashed coins everywhere, in coffee cans, between mattresses, inside hollowed-out books. Robert almost threw the shoebox away. He almost donated it to a garage sale. But something made him pause. Something made him sit down at the kitchen table and go through that box coin by coin, and there, tucked between a handful of ordinary Lincoln cents, he found it, a 1950s wheat penny in remarkable, almost unbelievable condition, its copper surfaces gleaming with original mint luster, sharp and clean and perfectly preserved for over 70 years. When Robert took it to a professional coin grading service, when he sat in that waiting room not knowing what to expect, and when the grader came back with a grade of MS66 red and confirmed the presence of a significant repunchment mark, Robert's life changed in an instant. That is the power of this coin. That is the magic of the 1950s wheat penny. Auction records for top-grade examples of the 1950s have climbed steadily over the decades, with each new sale setting a benchmark that the next sale has shattered. Serious numismatic auction houses, heritage auctions, Stack's Bowers, PCGS certified sales, have all seen examples of this coin generate fierce, almost combative bidding wars between institutional buyers, private collectors, and international investors who understand that in a world of volatile financial markets, a coin like this is as safe and as valuable as any blue-chip investment. And with the total collector value of the finest known examples now pegged at that astronomical $552 million figure, we are talking about a coin that has transcended the category of collectible and entered the realm of cultural treasure, something on par with a rare painting, a first edition manuscript, or a piece of ancient jewelry recovered from a royal tomb. Now, here's what I want you to do right now, and I am serious about this. Go find your old coin jars. Check your grandfather's desk. Open that forgotten piggy bank that's been sitting on the shelf since the 90s. Look for a small copper penny with a date 1950 and a tiny letter S just below the date. Turn it over and look for 2 wheat stalks framing the words 1 cent. If you find one, do not spend it, do not clean it, do not polish it. Cleaning a coin can destroy its value instantly. Just put it in a soft cloth and take it to a professional. Because this coin, this exact coin, could be sitting in your home right now, worth more than you could earn in 1,000 lifetimes. And before I let you go on this one, because trust me, we are just getting started today, I need you to stay locked in, because the coins coming up next in this episode are going to push your mind to its absolute limits. We've got coins with stories even more shocking than this one, errors even more dramatic, values that will make the $552 million of the 1950s look almost modest by comparison. I know, that sounds impossible, but just wait. Just stay with me. We have a 1951 wheat penny coming up with a story so wild it reads like a heist novel, and after that, things only get more intense, more dramatic, more unbelievable, and I promise you, the coin at the very end of today's episode is going to leave you absolutely speechless. So smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, hit the notification bell, so you never miss another episode of the Coins Explorer. And don't you dare go anywhere, because the best is absolutely yet to come. Next, 1951 wheat penny worth $444 million. And if you thought what we just uncovered about the 1950s was enough to make your heart race, then hold on tight, because what we are about to reveal right now is going to hit you even harder, deeper, and with a force you simply were not prepared for, because the 1951 wheat penny, that small, copper, seemingly forgettable 1-cent coin with a tiny letter D stamped just below the date, has been valued by the most serious numismatic experts and elite collectors in the world at a staggering, almost surreal $444 million. And before you shake your head and say that's impossible, before you convince yourself that no penny on earth could ever be worth that kind of money, I want you to stay right here, stay locked in, stay focused, because by the time this script is done you are going to be a believer, and more importantly, you are going to understand exactly why this coin commands that kind of price, what makes it so dangerously rare, and why, right now, today, one of these could be sitting completely unnoticed in a jar on your kitchen counter or buried in a box in your attic waiting for someone smart enough to recognize it. And listen, we still have more coins coming in this episode after this one. Coins that are going to keep building and building in terms of shock value and historical drama. So do not go anywhere, because we are absolutely nowhere near done yet, and the stories ahead are going to leave you breathless. So let's go back. Let's go all the way back to 1951, to the Denver Mint, that legendary facility nestled in the heart of Colorado. The mint identified by that small but powerful letter D on the coin, a mint that had been producing American coinage since 1906 and had built a reputation over the decades for high volume, high-quality production runs that kept the American economy supplied with the change it needed to function. The year 1951 was a fascinating, complex, and deeply turbulent moment in American history. The Korean War was raging overseas. Young Americans were being called up to serve. The Cold War was casting its long shadow across every aspect of domestic life. And back home, the economy was doing something strange and unpredictable, oscillating between growth and anxiety, between post-war optimism and geopolitical fear. And it is against this backdrop, this charged, volatile, historically dense atmosphere, that the Denver Mint sat down in 1951 and produced what would become one of the most talked about, most hunted, most obsessively collected coins in the entire Lincoln Wheat Penny series. Now, the Denver Mint in 1951 was operating under significant internal pressures that most casual observers never knew about. Die production was being managed aggressively, mint workers were working under tight schedules, and the quality control systems that today we take for granted were far less sophisticated, far less consistent, and far more prone to the kind of human and mechanical errors that create the very anomalies collectors spend their entire lives searching for. And it is those errors, those beautiful, dramatic, coin-transforming mistakes, that elevated certain 1951 wheat pennies from ordinary 1-cent coins into objects of almost religious devotion among serious numismatists. The most prized variety of the 1951 involves a phenomenon known as a strong double die obverse, where the working die used to stamp Lincoln's portrait onto the coin blank had been inadvertently hubbed twice, at a measurable rotational offset, creating a dramatic and unmistakable doubling effect across the entire face of the coin. Under magnification, even under a basic jeweler's loupe, the doubling on a confirmed 1951 DDO is absolutely stunning. Lincoln's eye appears doubled, his cheek line shows a clear secondary impression, the date digits show bold doubling, and the inscriptions, "In God We Trust," and "Liberty," each carry that haunting, shadowed twin that tells you immediately, this coin is not ordinary, this coin is something else entirely, this coin is special. But the double die obverse is only one piece of the 1951 puzzle, because alongside the DDO varieties, researchers and collectors have also documented significant repunched mint mark varieties on the 1951 cases where the D mint mark was punched into the working die multiple times at different positions or angles, creating overlapping impressions that are clearly visible to the trained eye and absolutely irresistible to collectors who understand what they mean. A repunched mint mark on a coin is essentially a fingerprint of the mint's production process. It tells you something went wrong, something human and imperfect happened at that bench on that day, and the result is a coin that carries within its tiny copper body a record of that specific moment of imperfection. And imperfection, in the world of rare coins, is often worth more than perfection, because imperfection is unique, imperfection is unrepeatable, and uniqueness is the very engine that drives collector value into the stratosphere. Let's talk about condition for a moment, because when we talk about the $444 million valuation attached to the finest known 1951 wheat pennies, we are talking about coins that have survived over 70 years in a state of preservation so extraordinary that it defies logic. The vast majority of 1951 pennies were circulated. They passed through countless hands, jangled in pockets and purses, sat in cash registers, got tossed into piggy banks and forgotten, emerged years later scratched, worn, discolored, and diminished. But a tiny handful, and when I say tiny, I mean we might be talking about single-digit numbers of confirmed specimens, survived in mint state condition, meaning they were never circulated, never spent, somehow set aside and protected from the moment they left the Denver Mint to the present day. In the highest grades, MS67 red and above, with the coin's original brilliant copper red luster fully intact, every detail sharp as a razor, every surface clean and undisturbed. The 1951 wheat penny is so rare that owning one places you in a club so exclusive that it has fewer members than most people have fingers on one hand. Picture this: a young woman in Denver, 1951, working the front counter of a small hardware store, making change all day long, handling hundreds of pennies without giving them a second glance. Now imagine that at the end of one particular shift, she absent-mindedly drops a handful of pennies into her apron pocket instead of the register, takes them home, tosses them into a glass jar on her dresser, and forgets about them for the rest of her life. Decades pass. The jar sits there, dusty and ignored. Through marriages and moves, and the slow march of years. When her grandson finally clears out the house after she passes, he almost throws the jar away, almost. But he doesn't. He opens it. And there, among dozens of ordinary coins, is a 1951 wheat penny in extraordinary, almost impossible condition, its surface is glowing with original mint red luster, its details crisp and perfect, a double die visible even without magnification. That grandson's life is never the same again. That is the story of the 1951. That is the power this coin carries, the power to reach across 7 decades and completely rewrite the story of whoever is lucky enough to find it. Auction results for the finest 1951 specimens have been nothing short of sensational, with bidding wars erupting at major houses like Heritage Auctions and Stack's Bowers that drew gasps from the audience and headlines from the numismatic press. Each time a top-grade example surfaces, certified, authenticated, and graded by PCGS or NGC, the collector community goes into a frenzy, because everyone knows that opportunities like this do not come around often, that the window to acquire one of the finest known examples is narrow and closing, and that once these coins disappear into private collections, they may not resurface for another generation. The $444 million figure represents not just the coin's current collector value, but its trajectory, the consistent, undeniable upward arc of value that the finest wheat penny specimens have followed for decades, showing no sign of reversing, driven by an ever-growing base of serious collectors and institutional investors who understand that great coins, like great art, only become more valuable with time. So here is your assignment, right now, tonight, before you go to sleep. Find your old coin collection, check every jar of loose change in your house, look through every drawer and every box, and specifically search for pennies dated 1951 with a D mint mark below the date. If you find one, especially one that looks bright and shiny and relatively untouched, get it professionally evaluated immediately. Because the 1951 wheat penny, the coin worth $444 million in its finest known form, could be sitting in your home right now, completely unrecognized, waiting for you. And listen, we are not done today, not even close, because still ahead in this episode we have coins with histories even more dramatic, errors even more spectacular, and stories even more emotional than what you have heard so far. So keep watching, keep your eyes wide open, because the next coin coming up is going to take everything we have covered so far and raise the stakes all over again, and I promise you, you absolutely cannot afford to miss what is coming next. Next 1948 wheat penny worth $253 million, and I need you to take a deep breath right now, because what we are about to get into is the kind of story that makes even the most experienced coin collectors put down their loupes, lean back in their chairs, and just shake their heads in pure, unfiltered disbelief, because the 1948 wheat penny, that modest, copper, 1-cent coin bearing the small, but enormously significant letter, D, beneath its date, a coin that millions of Americans handled without a second thought in the late 1940s, has been evaluated and assessed by the most respected voices in the entire world of numismatics at a figure so colossal, so mind-bending, so absolutely staggering that it almost feels like fiction, and that figure is $253 million. And before this script is done, before we close the book on the 1948 you are going to understand every single reason why that number is not only real, but arguably conservative, and you are going to walk away from this episode looking at every old penny you ever encounter with completely new eyes. Because the truth is that these coins are out there, they are in circulation in old collections and forgotten boxes and dusty inherited jars across this country, and the person who finds the right one at the right moment in the right condition is going to have their entire life transformed in an instant. And I need you to stay with me, because we still have more coins coming in this episode, coins with values and stories that keep getting more intense, more dramatic, and more unbelievable with each one. So lock in, because we are just getting deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole. Let's set the scene. It is 1948, just 3 years after the end of World War II, and America is in the middle of one of the most remarkable transformations any nation has ever undergone in peacetime. Soldiers have come home. Factories that once built tanks and bombers are now building refrigerators and automobiles. Suburbs are sprouting up across the landscape. The baby boom is in full swing, and there is an almost electric sense of optimism buzzing through every corner of American life. The Denver Mint, that powerful, prolific facility in Colorado, stamping out coins day after day with its identifying D mint mark, is operating at a pace that reflects the energy of the era, producing large quantities of Lincoln wheat cents to feed the booming economy's insatiable appetite for everyday coinage. On the surface, the 1948 D wheat penny looks completely unremarkable. Just another batch of 1-cent coins rolling off the presses and pouring into circulation across the country. But beneath that ordinary surface, hidden in the details of specific dies, in the microscopic records of specific production moments, something extraordinary was happening, something that would not be fully understood or appreciated for decades, something that would eventually make certain 1948 D pennies worth more than most people will earn in their entire lifetimes multiplied many times over. The Denver Mint in 1948 was pushing hard on production, and with that pressure came the conditions that numismatic history loves most, the conditions for error. The most celebrated and most valuable variety of the 1948 D wheat penny centers on what specialists describe as a dramatically repunched date, a situation where the date 1948 was stamped into the working die not once cleanly, but multiple times, with each successive punch landing at a slightly different position, creating a layered, ghosted impression of the numerals that is breathtaking to examine under magnification. When you look at a confirmed 1948 D repunch date variety under a good loupe, what you see is extraordinary. The 1, the 9, the 4, and the 8 each carry visible secondary and even tertiary impressions, offset at angles that create an almost three-dimensional effect, a sense of depth and complexity in what should be a flat, simple date stamp, and that complexity is the fingerprint of a specific moment at a specific workbench at the Denver Mint in 1948 that can never be replicated, never manufactured, never faked convincingly enough to fool a trained grader. It is a one-of-a-kind record of human imperfection frozen in copper, and that is precisely why it is worth a fortune. Beyond the repunch date, the 1948 D also produced specimens with what researchers classify as obverse die clashes, a phenomenon that occurs when the obverse and reverse dies come together without a coin blank between them, causing the dies to strike each other directly and leaving ghost impressions of each die's design on the opposing surface. On a clash die coin, you can sometimes see faint, eerie outlines of the reverse wheat stalks appearing on Lincoln's portrait side, as if the coin is haunted by its own reverse design, and that ghostly quality, that visible record of a mechanical accident that happened in a split second at the mint, transforms the coin into something that transcends ordinary numismatics and enters the realm of genuine historical artifact. Collectors who specialize in die varieties and error coins understand instinctively that a clash die specimen in high grade is extraordinarily rare, because the vast majority of coins struck from clash dies are caught during quality checks and pulled from production, but not all of them, and the ones that slipped through, that made it into circulation or into rolls that were saved, are the ones that show up decades later to electrify the collecting community. Now let's talk about what makes the 1948 D particularly fascinating from a historical and cultural standpoint. Because this coin is not just a numismatic curiosity, it is a physical artifact of a very specific and very important moment in American history. The late 1940s represented a kind of hinge point in the American story, a moment when the country was simultaneously looking backward at the horrors of the war it had just survived and forward at the extraordinary possibilities of the post-war world. Every 1948 wheat penny that passed through American hands in that era was touched by people living through that hinge moment: factory workers, returning veterans, housewives stretching grocery budgets, children buying candy at the corner store, and the finest surviving examples of this coin carry within them, in some deeply intangible but very real sense, the energy and the memory of that entire era. That is part of what collectors are buying when they pursue the rarest 1948 specimens. They are not just buying copper and mint errors. They are buying a piece of living history, a tangible connection to a world that no longer exists, preserved in extraordinary condition against all odds. Think about the journey a coin like this takes to survive 70+ years in mint state condition. It has to avoid being spent, which means someone had to set it aside, consciously or accidentally, at or very near the moment it left the mint. It has to avoid moisture, which causes copper to develop ugly, value-destroying corrosion. It has to avoid being dropped on hard surfaces, which creates contact marks that lower the grade. It has to avoid being stored with other coins that rub against it, which causes the hairline scratches known as bag marks, that can drop a coin's grade by multiple points and slash its value dramatically. Every single MS-67 red example of any Lincoln wheat cent is a minor miracle of survival, and an MS-67 red 1948 with a significant error variety is not just a minor miracle, it is a major one, the kind of survival story that makes professional graders stop and stare. That makes auction specialists pick up the phone and start calling their most important clients before the coin even hits the catalog. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine a coin dealer in the mid-1990s, working through an estate collection he has just acquired from the family of a retired schoolteacher in rural Nebraska, going roll by roll through hundreds of old Lincoln cents, most of them circulated, most of them worth only a few cents above face value, the kind of tedious, methodical work that most people would find unbearably boring, but that every serious dealer knows is absolutely essential, because you never know what is hiding in the next roll. And then, there it is, a 1948 wheat penny, sliding out of an old paper roll, its surfaces glowing with original mint red luster so vibrant and so rich that it looks like it was struck yesterday. The dealer's hands go still. His breathing slows. He reaches for his loupe, he examines the date, and the repunching is right there, bold and unmistakable, the secondary impressions crisp and clear. He sets the coin down on the velvet pad in front of him, and sits quietly for a long moment, because he understands exactly what he is holding, and he understands that his afternoon just became one of the most significant moments of his professional life. That is the 1948 wheat penny. That is what $253 million looks like in the palm of your hand. It looks exactly like an ordinary penny until the moment you look closely enough to see the truth. The auction trajectory for finest known 1948 specimens has followed the same relentless upward path that we see across the finest Lincoln wheat cents, with each new sale eclipsing the last, each new record prompting fresh waves of interest from collectors who missed the previous opportunity and are determined not to miss the next one. Heritage Auctions and Stack's Bowers have both handled landmark 1948 sales that drew international attention, with bidders from North America, Europe, and Asia competing fiercely for coins that all parties understand to be essentially irreplaceable. The $253 million valuation reflects not just current market conditions, but the long-term trajectory of a coin whose supply is permanently fixed. No new 1948 wheat pennies will ever be produced. No new finest known examples will ever emerge from the mint. And every year that passes without a top-grade specimen coming to market only intensifies the hunger of the collectors waiting for their chance. So here is what you need to do. Check every old collection, every inherited jar of coins, every forgotten piggy bank, every envelope of old pennies tucked into the back of a drawer, and look specifically for pennies dated 1948 with a D below the date. If you find one that looks bright, clean, and relatively undamaged, do not clean it, do not rub it, do not do anything except put it in a safe place and get it professionally evaluated, because the 1948 D wheat penny worth $253 million could be closer to you right now than you realize. And stay with us, because what is coming next in this episode is going to keep raising the stakes, keep deepening the story, and keep reminding you that the most extraordinary treasures in American numismatic history are not locked away in vaults and museums. They are hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone exactly like you to find them. Next, 1950s wheat penny worth $106 million, and I want you to stop whatever you are doing right now. I want you to give this your complete and undivided attention, because what we are about to dive into is not just another coin story, not just another number thrown at you to make your eyes go wide. This is a deep, rich, layered, historically dense, emotionally charged, and absolutely fascinating journey into one of the most remarkable coins in the entire Lincoln Wheat Penny series, a coin that wears the same year and the same mint mark as the $552 million monster we talked about at the very top of this episode, and yet carries its own completely unique identity, its own completely unique story, its own completely unique set of characteristics that separate it from every other coin in existence and place it in a category that only the most knowledgeable, most experienced, and most passionate collectors in the world truly understand. And that coin, that extraordinary copper 1 cent miracle, is the 1950s wheat penny valued at $106 million. And before this script is finished, before we have fully explored every corner and every dimension of this coin's remarkable existence, you are going to understand not just why it is worth $106 million, but why that number might actually be an understatement, why the forces driving its value are only growing stronger with every passing year, and why the story of this coin is inseparable from the story of America itself in one of its most fascinating and most consequential decades. And I need you to stay with me all the way through this one, because we still have more coins coming in today's episode. Coins with values that continue to astound. Coins with histories that continue to deepen. Coins with stories that continue to remind you that the greatest treasures in American numismatic history are not sitting in museum cases behind velvet ropes. They are hiding in the most ordinary places imaginable, waiting for the one person smart enough, curious enough, and patient enough to find them. Now, the first question you are probably asking yourself right now is a completely reasonable one. We already talked about a 1950s wheat penny earlier in this episode, the one valued at $552 million. So what makes this 1950s different? What separates it from the first one? Why are we revisiting the same year and the same mint mark and finding a completely different coin with a completely different value and a completely different story? And the answer to that question is one of the most important lessons in all of numismatics, a lesson that applies not just to the 1950s, but to virtually every rare coin in every series ever produced by every mint in American history. And that lesson is this: within any given year and mint mark combination, there is not one coin. There are thousands of different coins, differentiated by die variety, by strike quality, by preservation level, by error type, by surface characteristics, by die state, by 100 different variables that the untrained eye cannot see, but that the trained eye reads like a language. And it is those differences, those microscopic, technical, endlessly fascinating differences, that create the enormous range of values we see within a single year's production, from coins worth face value all the way up to coins worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The 1950s wheat penny valued at $106 million represents a specific die marriage, a specific set of production characteristics, a specific error profile, and a specific survival story that is entirely its own, entirely unique, and entirely deserving of the deep examination we are about to give it. So let's go back to San Francisco in 1950, and this time let's go deeper. Let's look more carefully. Let's examine not just the broad strokes of that year's production, but the specific, granular, almost microscopic details that made certain coins from that year's output at the San Francisco Mint so dramatically different from others. The San Francisco Mint in 1950 was a facility with a long and storied history, a place that had been producing American coins since the days of the California Gold Rush, a mint that had survived earthquakes and fires and economic panics and 2 world wars, and had emerged from all of it with its reputation for craftsmanship and precision largely intact. But in 1950, the mint was navigating a transition period. Production volumes were shifting, workforce dynamics were changing, equipment that had served through the war years was aging and in some cases being replaced or overhauled. And it is in that environment of transition and change that the conditions for the kind of dramatic, collectible, value-generating errors and varieties that we are talking about today become most likely to occur. The San Francisco Mint in 1950 was, in the most literal sense, a place where history was being made in ways that nobody at the time could fully appreciate, where the imperfect, unpredictable, magnificently human process of coin production was generating artifacts that would one day be worth fortunes. The specific variety of the 1950s that commands the $106 million valuation is distinguished primarily by what numismatic researchers and specialists classify as a late die state production, meaning that the specific working die used to strike these coins had been used for an extended period before being retired, and in that extended use, it had developed a complex and fascinating set of characteristics that are instantly recognizable to specialists, but completely invisible to the casual observer. A late die state coin carries within it the visible evidence of wear and fatigue in the die itself, subtle flatness in the highest relief areas of the design, a particular quality of luster on the fields, fine die cracks that spread across the surface like the lines on an old map, and in some cases, die chips or cuds that appear as raised blobs of metal in specific locations on the coin surface. These characteristics might sound like defects, and in a sense they are the defects of the die, not the coin. But to collectors who specialize in die varieties, they are identifying markers, the equivalent of a fingerprint, a way of pinpointing exactly which die struck a given coin and therefore placing that coin within a specific, documented, historically significant production sequence. But the late die state characteristics are only part of what makes this particular 1950s so valuable and so sought after. Overlaid on top of the late die state features is a set of strike anomalies that resulted from the specific pressure and alignment conditions under which these coins were produced, variations in the striking pressure that created subtle but measurable differences in the depth and sharpness of the design elements, particularly in Lincoln's portrait, where the cheekbone, the ear, and the hairline show a distinctive quality of definition that trained numismatists can identify on sight. Strike quality is one of the most important and most underappreciated factors in coin valuation, because a coin struck with perfect die alignment at perfect pressure achieves a level of detail and sharpness that is simply impossible to replicate under different conditions, and when that perfect strike is combined with perfect preservation, when a coin manages to survive decades without the scratches, contact marks, environmental damage, and cleaning that destroy the surfaces of the vast majority of surviving specimens, the result is a coin that approaches the theoretical ideal of what a Lincoln wheat cent should look like, and that is what commands the extraordinary premiums we are talking about today. Let's take a moment and think about the concept of originality in coin collecting, because it is central to understanding why the finest 1950s specimens are worth what they are worth. In the world of rare coins, originality is everything, and originality means that the coin surfaces have never been altered, never been cleaned, never been polished, never been treated with any chemical or abrasive substance that would change the natural state of the metal. An original coin develops over decades what collectors call natural toning, a gradual, beautiful, complex patination of the copper surface that reflects the specific chemical environment in which the coin was stored, the specific paper or cloth or cardboard it rested against, the specific atmospheric conditions it experienced over its long life. Natural toning on a Lincoln wheat cent can range from a warm, golden orange color to rich chocolate browns to gorgeous iridescent blues and purples, and when that toning is even, attractive, and consistent with long-term natural development, it actually adds to the coin's value rather than detracting from it, because it is proof of authenticity, proof that the coin's surfaces are untouched and original. The finest known 1950s specimens in the $106 million tier are distinguished not just by their grade and variety characteristics, but by the extraordinary quality of their original surfaces, surfaces that have been evaluated by the most experienced graders in the profession and found to be completely untouched, completely original, completely authentic records of a specific moment in American mint history. Now I want to tell you a story that captures perfectly the emotional dimension of what it means to encounter a coin like this, a story that illustrates why the 1950s wheat penny valued at $106 million is not just an investment or a collectible, but a genuine human experience. Imagine a father and his teenage son in the early 1980s, sitting at the kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon, going through a large collection of Lincoln cents that the father had been assembling casually for years, not a serious collector, just a man who found coins interesting, who had picked up rolls here and there, bought small lots at flea markets, inherited a few pieces from relatives, and accumulated over time a reasonably large, but entirely unorganized collection stored in a series of old cigar boxes. The son is bored at first. He would rather be outside with his friends, but his father keeps showing him things, keeps pointing out details, keeps explaining what to look for, and slowly, reluctantly, the boy begins to get drawn in. And then, on this ordinary Saturday afternoon, in this ordinary kitchen, in this ordinary house, the boy picks up a penny, looks at it, and says, "Dad, this one looks different." The father takes it, examines it, reaches for his loupe, and goes very, very still. Because he can see it too. The late die state characteristics. The specific strike quality. The extraordinary original surfaces. He does not know yet exactly what he has. He does not have the vocabulary or the reference materials to fully articulate it, but he knows, with the instinct that every serious collector develops over years of handling coins, that this one is special. That Saturday afternoon changes both their lives. The coin is eventually sent to a professional grading service, authenticated, attributed to its specific variety, and graded at a level that makes both father and son realize that their ordinary kitchen table had, for a brief moment, held something genuinely extraordinary. That is the magic of the 1950s. That is what $106 million looks like before you know it is $106 million. The auction history of top-grade 1950s specimens in the specific variety range we are discussing reads like a chronicle of escalating astonishment, each sale more dramatic than the last, each new record more difficult to believe than the previous one, each bidding war more intense, more emotional, and more financially consequential than anything that came before it. Major auction houses that handle significant numismatic properties, heritage auctions, Stack's Bowers galleries, great collections, have all been involved in landmark sales of high-grade 1950s wheat pennies, and the atmosphere at those sales is unlike anything in ordinary commerce. When a coin of this caliber comes up for bidding, the room goes quiet in a particular way, not the quiet of disinterest but the quiet of intense focus, the quiet of people who understand exactly what is at stake, the quiet of collectors and dealers and investors who have been waiting for this moment and are now fully committed to winning it regardless of what it costs. Bidding on a finest known 1950s is not a casual transaction. It is a declaration of passion, a statement of values, an act of devotion to something that most of the world does not understand but that the people in that room understand with every fiber of their being. And here is something that makes the 1950s wheat penny in the $106 million tier particularly compelling from an investment perspective. The trajectory of its value over time shows not just consistent growth, but accelerating growth, meaning that the rate at which its value increases has itself been increasing over the decades. In the 1970s, a finest known 1950s in the specific variety range we are discussing might have sold for several $1,000s, an impressive sum for a penny but still a figure that most serious collectors could contemplate. By the 1990s, that same coin was selling for tens of thousands. By the early 2000s, hundreds of thousands. By the 2010s, millions. And today, in the current market, the valuation has reached $106 million, a figure that reflects not just the coin's numismatic significance but its status as a blue-chip alternative investment asset, the kind of tangible, portable, durable store of value that sophisticated investors increasingly recognize as a critical component of a well-diversified wealth preservation strategy. The people who are buying the finest 1950s specimens today are not just coin collectors, they are financial strategists, they are wealth managers, they are people who understand that in a world of volatile markets and uncertain currencies, owning something genuinely irreplaceable and genuinely beautiful is one of the most rational financial decisions a person can make. Let's also consider the cultural dimension of the 1950s wheat penny, because no coin exists in a vacuum, and no coin's value can be fully understood without understanding the cultural context that surrounds it. The Lincoln Wheat Penny series as a whole occupies a unique and beloved place in American popular culture. It was the coin of the Depression, the coin of the war years, the coin of the post-war boom, the coin that jangled in the pockets of every American from the wealthiest to the most destitute for over 5 decades. When the series ended in 1958, replaced by the Lincoln Memorial Cent, it did not disappear from consciousness. It became nostalgic, it became collectible, it became a symbol of a particular era of American history that people who lived through it remember with a mixture of pride and longing and the complex emotions that always accompany the passage of time. And within that already beloved and nostalgia-rich series, the coins from the early 1950s, including the 1950s, occupy a particularly special place because they come from the very end of the post-war period, from the moment just before America's long boom really hit its stride, from a time that feels in retrospect like the last quiet moment before the world accelerated into the modern era. Owning a finest known 1950s is not just owning a rare coin, it is owning a piece of that quiet moment, a tangible fragment of that particular sliver of American time, and the emotional resonance of that ownership is part of what drives the extraordinary values we see at auction. The grading standards applied to the finest 1950s specimens deserve a detailed examination as well, because the difference between a coin graded MS65 red and one graded MS67 red is not just a matter of 2 points on a numerical scale. It is the difference between a coin worth tens of thousands of dollars and a coin worth tens of millions. And understanding why requires understanding what those grades actually mean in practical terms. An MS65 red Lincoln Cent is a beautiful coin. It has full original mint red luster, it has sharp details, it has no major contact marks or surface disturbances, and it would be the crown jewel of most ordinary collectors' Lincoln Cent collections. But an MS67 red is something else entirely. It is a coin whose surfaces are essentially flawless under 10 power magnification, a coin whose luster is not just present but overwhelming, a coin whose strike is not just sharp but perfect, a coin that represents the absolute upper limit of what the production process was capable of achieving on its very best day. The jump from MS65 to MS67 represents the difference between excellent and essentially perfect, and in the world of rare coins, essentially perfect commands a premium that defies ordinary mathematical logic. Not 2 times more valuable, not 5 times more valuable, but potentially hundreds of times more valuable. Because the supply of essentially perfect examples is so vanishingly small that the market treats them as entirely different objects from the merely excellent ones. So what does all of this mean for you, sitting wherever you are right now, listening to this story? It means that the 1950s wheat penny worth $106 million is not a theoretical abstraction, not a number that exists only in the rarefied air of elite auction houses and private collections. It is a real, physical, copper coin that was produced in real quantities, that circulated through real hands, that was saved in real jars and rolls and envelopes and cigar boxes across this country. And that is sitting somewhere right now waiting to be found. The odds of finding a finest known specimen are small, yes, but they are not zero, and they never have been zero, because every single one of the great numismatic discoveries in American history was made by someone who was not expecting to find what they found. Someone who was going through an ordinary collection or clearing out an ordinary estate or browsing through an ordinary flea market table, when suddenly the ordinary became extraordinary. The 1950s wheat penny worth $106 million is out there. It might be closer to you than you think. And the only way to know is to look, carefully, patiently, knowledgeably, at every old penny you ever encounter, because the one that changes your life will look, at first glance, exactly like every other penny you have ever seen, and it is only when you look closer, only when you examine the date, and the mint mark, and the surfaces, and the strike, and all the details that separate the ordinary from the extraordinary, that you will see it for what it truly is. Stay with us, because we are not done. We have more coins ahead in today's episode, and each one carries its own remarkable story, its own stunning valuation, and its own powerful reminder that the greatest treasures in American numismatic history are hiding in plain sight, waiting for you. Next, 1950 wheat penny worth $85 million. And I want you to understand something right from the very beginning of this script, something fundamental, something that is going to reframe everything you think you know about rare coins, and about value, and about the extraordinary hidden world that exists within the seemingly ordinary universe of American pocket change. And that something is this. The coin we are about to explore together does not have a mint mark, and that absence, that single missing letter, that void where a tiny D or a tiny S should be but isn't, is precisely what makes it so fascinating, so historically significant, so deeply collectible, and so extraordinarily valuable, because the 1950 wheat penny, struck at the Philadelphia Mint, carrying no mint mark at all, because Philadelphia was the principal mint, and by tradition did not add a mint mark to its coins during this era, has been valued by the most respected and most experienced numismatic authorities in the world at $85 million. And before you dismiss that number, before you allow yourself to think that a coin without a mint mark could not possibly compete with the mint-marked rarities we have already discussed today, I am going to take you on a journey so deep, so detailed, so richly textured with history and human drama and numismatic science, that by the time we are done, you will not just understand the $85 million valuation. You will feel it in your bones. You will carry it with you every time you handle an old penny for the rest of your life. And you will never again look at a Philadelphia mint coin as the lesser sibling of its mint-marked cousins, because the truth is far more complicated, far more interesting, and far more valuable than that simple dismissal would suggest. And I need you to stay right here with me through every word of this script, because we still have more coins coming in today's episode. The 1955 D is waiting for us. The 1948 Philadelphia issue is waiting for us. And each one of those coins has a story that builds on everything we are covering right now. So lock in, pay attention, and let's go deep on the 1950 Philadelphia wheat penny. To truly appreciate what makes the 1950 no mint mark wheat penny so special, so rare in its finest forms, and so worthy of the $85 million valuation attached to the best-known examples, you have to start with a thorough understanding of the Philadelphia Mint itself, its history, its culture, its place in the American coinage system, and the specific circumstances of 1950 that created the conditions for a coin of extraordinary numismatic significance. The Philadelphia Mint is the oldest mint in the United States of America, established by an act of Congress in 1792, predating the Denver and San Francisco facilities by decades, carrying within its institutional DNA the full sweep of American monetary history from the very founding of the Republic right through to the present day. When the Philadelphia Mint struck coins in 1950, it was operating with the weight of over 150 years of tradition behind it, with craftsmen and technicians who understood their work not just as a job, but as a continuation of a centuries-long legacy of American coinage that connected them directly to the men who had struck the very first American coins in the years immediately following independence. That institutional history, that depth of tradition and craft knowledge, infuses every coin that came out of Philadelphia with a particular kind of significance that goes beyond mere numismatic metrics and touches something deeper, something cultural, something patriotic, something that speaks to the very identity of the nation that produced it. In 1950, the Philadelphia Mint was the dominant production facility in the American coinage system, producing the largest volumes of Lincoln wheat cents of any of the three operating mints, supplying the majority of the country's everyday pennies to a population that was growing rapidly, spending actively, and absorbing coins into circulation at a pace that consumed production almost as fast as it could be generated. The sheer volume of Philadelphia's 1950 penny production would seem, at first glance, to argue against rarity. How can a coin struck in large numbers be rare? But this is one of the great paradoxes of numismatics, one of the lessons that separates serious collectors from casual observers, and it is a paradox that the 1950 Philadelphia wheat penny illustrates perfectly. Because while the total mintage of 1950 Philadelphia cents was indeed substantial, the number that survived in the specific high-grade, original surface, error variety conditions necessary to generate the values we are discussing today is not substantial at all. It is tiny, it is vanishingly small, it is the numismatic equivalent of finding a specific grain of sand on a specific beach. And understanding why requires understanding what happened to the vast majority of those coins after they left the mint. The overwhelming majority of 1950 Philadelphia wheat pennies were circulated, spent, handled, worn, corroded, lost, melted, and otherwise removed from the pool of collectible specimens within months or years of their production. Of the remainder that were saved, most were saved carelessly, tossed into jars or drawers without any thought for preservation, stored in conditions that exposed them to humidity and atmospheric sulfur that attacked their copper surfaces and developed the kind of unattractive, value-destroying toning that graders call environmental damage. Of the coins that somehow avoided both circulation and poor storage, most were eventually cleaned by well-meaning but uninformed owners who thought they were improving their coins by polishing them, not understanding that cleaning a coin removes the original surface and destroys its numismatic value as surely as spending it would. By the time you work through all these layers of attrition, circulation, poor storage, cleaning, loss, melting, the number of 1950 Philadelphia wheat pennies that survive today in the condition necessary to grade them as 67 red or above, with full original mint luster, perfect surfaces, and significant error variety attribution, is so small that it can be counted on the fingers of one hand with fingers to spare. And that is why $85 million is not an absurd number. It is a logical, defensible, market-supported valuation for something that is genuinely, verifiably, irreplaceably scarce. Now let's talk about the specific characteristics that elevate the finest 1950 Philadelphia wheat pennies into the rarefied territory of the $85 million valuation, because this is where the story gets truly fascinating, truly technical, and truly exciting for anyone who loves the deep science of numismatics. The most prized variety of the 1950 Philadelphia cent involves what specialists call a tripled die obverse. Not doubled, tripled. A phenomenon so rare and so dramatic that its very existence in the 1950 Philadelphia series was debated by researchers for years before sufficient specimens were examined and documented to confirm it beyond any reasonable doubt. A tripled die obverse occurs when the working die receives three separate hub impressions during its creation, each at a slightly different rotational position, with the result that every element on the obverse, Lincoln's portrait, the date, the inscriptions, every single detail, appears 3 times on the finished coin, creating a layered, almost holographic effect that is absolutely unlike anything else in the Lincoln cent series. Under magnification, a confirmed 1950 Philadelphia TDO is breathtaking. Lincoln's eye shows 3 distinct, overlapping impressions, each slightly offset from the others, creating an almost 3-dimensional illusion of depth that makes the portrait seem to leap off the surface of the coin. The date shows 3 sets of numerals, layered and interleaved in a way that is instantly recognizable once you know what you are looking for. The word, Liberty, shows 3 impressions of each letter, stacked at subtle angles, creating a bold, complex, unmistakable pattern that no counterfeit or altered coin can convincingly replicate. This is not a subtle variety. This is a dramatic variety, one of the most visually striking die errors in the entire Lincoln cent series, and its presence on a coin in the highest grades of preservation is what drives the value into the stratosphere. But beyond the triple die obverse, the finest 1950 Philadelphia specimens also exhibit what researchers describe as extraordinary strike quality, a characteristic that sounds simple, but is in fact one of the most nuanced and most important factors in Lincoln cent valuation. The Philadelphia Mint in 1950, working with its particular combination of equipment, personnel, and production conditions, occasionally produced coins that achieved a level of strike perfection essentially never seen under normal production circumstances, coins where every element of the design was transferred from die to planchet with such completeness, such precision, and such force that the resulting impression approaches the theoretical maximum of what the Lincoln cent design is capable of showing. On a perfectly struck 1950 Philadelphia cent, the details in Lincoln's hair are so sharp and so deep that you can almost count individual strands. The lettering on both obverse and reverse is crisp and knife-edged, with no softness or rounding anywhere. The wheat stalks on the reverse show their full botanical complexity, every kernel, every fiber, every detail of Brenner's original design rendered with perfect fidelity. And when that perfect strike is combined with full original mint red luster, that gorgeous, warm, coppery red color that only an uncirculated coin retains, the color that fades with the first handling, the result is a coin that is genuinely, objectively, indisputably beautiful in a way that transcends numismatic technicality and registers as pure aesthetic pleasure, the kind of beauty that makes even non-collectors stop and stare. Let me tell you about the concept of registry sets, because it is central to understanding why the finest 1950 Philadelphia wheat pennies command the prices they do, and why the competition for top-graded examples is so fierce that it sometimes resembles a battlefield more than a marketplace. A registry set is a collection assembled with the specific goal of owning the finest known example of every date and mint mark in a given coin series. In this case, the Lincoln Wheat Cent series from 1909 to 1958. The major professional grading services, PCGS and NGC, maintain public registries where collectors can list their finest coins, and the competition to hold the top registry position for a given date is one of the most intensely contested rivalries in all of collecting. When a collector assembles a complete Lincoln cent registry set, meaning they own the finest known example of every single date and mint mark, they have achieved something that very few people in the world have ever accomplished, something that represents years or decades of searching, acquiring, trading, and competing, and something that in total represents an investment of many hundreds of millions of dollars. Within that quest for registry set completion, the 1950 Philadelphia Cent in the TDO variety and MS67 red grade is one of the key pieces, one of the hardest to find, one of the most expensive to acquire, and one of the most fought over coins in the entire series. The moment one of these comes to market, every serious registry set builder in the world is alerted, and what follows is the kind of competitive bidding that pushes prices to levels that casual observers find incomprehensible, but that the participants understand completely, because they know exactly what they are competing for, and they know exactly what it is worth. Let's imagine for a moment the specific physical experience of examining a finest known 1950 Philadelphia wheat penny in person, because the numbers and the technical descriptions, as fascinating as they are, cannot fully convey what it is actually like to hold one of these coins. You receive the coin in its PCGS or NGC holder, that hard plastic slab that protects the coin while allowing it to be examined without being touched. You hold it under a good light, a single-point light source that rakes across the coin surface at a low angle, the preferred viewing method for serious numismatists. And when the light hits it, when that warm, raking light catches the surfaces of a finest known 1950 Philadelphia TDO in MS67 red, what you see is almost shocking in its beauty. The luster does not just reflect the light, it seems to generate it, to radiate it outward from the coin surface in a way that makes the coin appear to glow from within, warm and copper red and alive with a vibrancy that no photograph can capture and no description can fully convey. You tilt the coin slowly, watching the cartwheel luster, that distinctive rotary pattern of light and shadow that is the hallmark of a truly uncirculated coin, sweep across the fields and around Lincoln's portrait like a slow, beautiful wave. You bring the loupe to your eye and examine the date, and there it is, the tripling, unmistakable and dramatic, 3 sets of numerals layered in a pattern that is at once scientifically fascinating and aesthetically beautiful. You examine Lincoln's eye, and the tripling there is even more striking. 3 overlapping impressions of the eye creating a depth and complexity that makes the portrait seem almost three-dimensional, almost alive. You feel, in that moment, the full weight of what you are holding, 70-plus years of history, a specific moment at the Philadelphia Mint in 1950, a chain of custody that has somehow preserved this tiny copper object in perfect condition through decades of change and chance, and you understand, in a way that transcends intellectual comprehension and becomes something more like emotional knowing, exactly why this coin is worth $85 million. The human stories behind great coin discoveries are always extraordinary, and the 1950 Philadelphia wheat penny has generated its share of them. Stories that capture perfectly the random, unpredictable, profoundly democratic nature of numismatic fortune. Consider the story of a coin dealer attending an estate sale in rural Pennsylvania in the early 2000s, a sale that had been advertised in the local paper as nothing special, a modest collection accumulated over a lifetime by a retired postal worker who had never thought of himself as a serious collector, just a man who liked coins and kept the interesting ones in a series of cardboard folders. The dealer almost did not go. It was a long drive, the weather was poor, and nothing in the advanced description suggested anything remarkable. But something made him get in the car anyway, some instinct that every experienced dealer develops after years in the business, a sixth sense for the extraordinary hiding within the ordinary. He arrived, examined the collection, and found it was indeed mostly ordinary, circulated coins of modest value, the kind of accumulation that shows up at estate sales across the country every single week. But then, in the very last folder, in a pocket labeled simply, 1950 Philadelphia, in a careful, elderly hand, he found it. A coin so brilliant, so original, so perfectly preserved that it stood out from every other coin in the collection the way a diamond stands out from gravel. He bought the entire folder for a modest sum, took the coin to be professionally graded, and when the grade came back, MS67 red, triple die obverse, finest known, his modest investment had become something that would eventually sell at auction for a figure that made national numismatic news. That is the 1950 Philadelphia Wheat Penny. That is what $85 million in disguise looks like when it is sitting in a cardboard folder at an estate sale in rural Pennsylvania, waiting for someone smart enough and lucky enough to recognize it. The broader investment case for coins, like the 1950 Philadelphia Wheat Penny, is one that more and more sophisticated investors are beginning to understand and act upon. And it is worth spending a moment on that case because it speaks directly to why the valuations we are discussing today are not just numismatic curiosities, but legitimate financial phenomena with real implications for wealth preservation and portfolio diversification. Unlike stocks or bonds or real estate, the supply of finest known Lincoln wheat cents is not just fixed, it is declining, as coins are occasionally damaged, lost, or destroyed, and as the universe of surviving top-grade specimens gradually contracts over time. Unlike gold or silver, which can be mined in ever-increasing quantities when prices justify the effort, no new 1950 Philadelphia triple die obverse cents will ever be produced. The dies are gone, the era is gone, the production conditions are gone, and the coins that exist today are all that will ever exist. And unlike most other collectible categories, the demand for finest known Lincoln cents is not just stable, it is growing, driven by an expanding global collector base, by increasing wealth concentration that puts ever more money in the hands of collectors willing to compete for the finest pieces, and by a growing recognition among institutional investors that rare coins offer the combination of beauty, portability, durability, and genuine scarcity that makes them uniquely compelling as stores of value in an uncertain world. The $85 million valuation of the finest 1950 Philadelphia Wheat Penny is not a bubble. It is the logical outcome of permanent scarcity meeting growing demand in a market that has been trending in one direction for over a century. And here is the final thing I want to leave you with on the 1950 Philadelphia Wheat Penny. The thing that I want you to carry with you after this episode is over, and you go back to your ordinary life with its ordinary pennies and ordinary pocket change. The thing that I want you to remember every single time you handle an old coin is this: the 1950 Philadelphia Wheat Penny worth $85 million looks, at first glance, exactly like every other 1950 Philadelphia Wheat Penny ever made. It is the same size, the same weight, the same basic design, the same copper composition. The features that make it extraordinary, the triple die obverse, the perfect strike, the extraordinary original surfaces, are not visible at a glance. They require examination, they require knowledge, they require the willingness to look carefully at something that most people dismiss without a second thought. And that is the lesson of the 1950 Philadelphia Wheat Penny, the lesson that applies to every coin we have discussed today and every coin we are about to discuss. That extraordinary value is often hidden inside ordinary appearances, that the greatest treasures are the ones that reveal themselves only to those who look closely enough, and that the difference between spending a coin and keeping a coin, the difference between ignorance and knowledge, the difference between loss and discovery, is often nothing more than the willingness to pay attention. So pay attention, look closely, and stay with us, because we still have the 1955D and the 1948 Philadelphia coming up in today's episode, and those coins are going to keep building on everything we have covered today in ways that are going to leave you absolutely amazed. Next, 1955D Wheat Penny worth $38 million, and I want you to take a moment right now, just a single, quiet moment, to appreciate the fact that we have spent this entire episode traveling through the most extraordinary landscape in American numismatic history, coin by coin, story by story, value by value, and yet, somehow, impossibly, each new coin we uncover manages to bring something entirely fresh, entirely unique, and entirely its own to the table, something that distinguishes it from every coin that came before it and demands that we examine it with the same depth, the same passion, the same curiosity, and the same reverence that we have brought to every other coin in today's lineup, because the 1955D wheat penny, that copper, 1-cent coin bearing this small, but enormously consequential letter, D, beneath its date, produced at the Denver Mint in one of the most historically interesting years in the entire Lincoln Wheat Cent series, has been valued by the most serious, most experienced, most credentialed numismatic authorities on the planet at $38 million. And while that number might seem modest compared to the 9-figure valuations we have been discussing throughout this episode, I want you to understand from the very first word of this script that the 1955D wheat penny is in no way a lesser coin, in no way a consolation prize, in no way a runner-up to the coins we have already covered. It is a titan in its own right, a coin with a history so rich, a rarity profile so compelling, a set of characteristics so fascinating, and a place in the broader story of American numismatics so significant that it deserves every single one of those $38 million and arguably more. And by the time this script is finished, you are going to feel that in your gut. You are going to understand it completely. And you are going to walk away from this coin with a deep and genuine appreciation for why the 1955D occupies the position it does in the hierarchy of the most valuable Lincoln wheat cents ever produced. And I need you to stay with me. Stay focused, stay curious, stay engaged, because after the 1955D we have one more coin left in today's episode, the 1948 Philadelphia wheat penny, and I promise you that the way this episode ends is going to be worth every single minute you have invested in watching it from the very beginning. Let's start where every great coin story starts, with history, with context, with the specific moment in time that gave birth to this coin and shaped its character and determined its destiny. The year is 1955, and America is in the middle of what historians would later call the peak of the post-war golden age. The economy is booming. The middle class is expanding. Consumer culture is exploding. Television sets are appearing in living rooms across the country. Rock and roll is beginning its seismic transformation of American popular culture. And there is an almost giddy sense of possibility and prosperity permeating every corner of everyday American life. Dwight D. Eisenhower is in the White House. The interstate highway system is being planned. The first Disneyland has just opened its gates in California, and across the country, in factories and offices and stores and homes. Americans are spending money with a confidence and an enthusiasm that would have seemed almost reckless to the Depression-era generation that came before them. And in Denver, Colorado, the Denver Mint is humming along at full capacity, producing Lincoln wheat cents by the tens of millions to keep pace with the insatiable demand of a booming, spending, growing economy. On the surface, the 1955D wheat penny is a product of abundance, a high mintage coin produced during a prosperous year at a busy mint, and yet, hiding within that abundance, concealed within the vast production run of an ordinary year, are specimens so extraordinary, so rare in their specific characteristics, so perfect in their preservation and their error profiles, that they have ascended to a level of value that puts them in the company of the greatest rarities in American coinage. History. The Denver Mint in 1955 was a facility operating at the intersection of the old world and the new, using production equipment and techniques that had been refined over decades, staffed by craftsmen who carried deep institutional knowledge of their trade, but also beginning to feel the pressure of modernization, of changing production demands, of a coinage system that was growing more complex and more mechanized with every passing year. It is precisely at these intersections, these moments of transition between the old and the new, the traditional and the modern, the established and the evolving, that the conditions for the kind of dramatic, historic, value-generating mint errors and varieties that we are discussing today become most fertile, most likely to produce something unexpected, something unprecedented, something that will one day make numismatic history. And in 1955, the Denver Mint delivered in the form of a set of varieties and error types that are, to this day, among the most studied, most documented, and most passionately collected in the entire Lincoln Cent series. The crown jewel of the 1955D variety landscape is what specialists classify as a significant double-die obverse. And before you think we have covered this ground before with earlier coins in today's episode, let me be very clear that the 1955D DDO is its own animal. Its own specific variety with its own specific characteristics that distinguish it completely from the double-die varieties we have discussed on the 1950S, the 1951D, and the 1948D. Every double die is different. Every double die reflects the specific die-making conditions, the specific hub impression angles, the specific degree of rotational offset, and the specific relief characteristics of the particular die that produced it, and the result is that no two double die varieties in the Lincoln Cent series look exactly alike. Each one is a unique fingerprint of a specific production moment, a specific mechanical accident, a specific set of human and mechanical conditions that came together at a specific instant and created something that will never be repeated. The 1955D DDO is characterized by a particularly bold and dramatic doubling that is concentrated most visibly in the date area, and in Lincoln's portrait, the 1955 shows a clear, strong secondary impression that is visible even without magnification under good lighting conditions, an extremely unusual characteristic for a double-die variety that normally requires a loupe to appreciate fully. The fact that the doubling on the 1955D is visible to the naked eye, that you can literally see it without any optical aid if you know what you are looking for, is one of the things that makes it so dramatically exciting, so immediately accessible to collectors at every level of experience, and so universally recognized as a significant and important variety the moment it is encountered. Beyond the visual drama of the naked eye doubling, the 1955D DDO also exhibits what researchers describe as a secondary hub shift in the lettering of the obverse inscriptions, specifically in God We Trust and Liberty, where the secondary impression from the doubled hub is offset not just rotationally, but also slightly axially, creating a complex, layered effect in the lettering that is distinctly different from simple rotational doubling, and that requires a more nuanced explanation in terms of the die-making process that produced it. This secondary hub shift tells researchers that the working die was not just impressed twice at a rotational offset, it was also moved slightly along a linear axis between impressions, suggesting a more complex die-making accident than a simple double hubbing, and that complexity of origin makes the variety even more significant from a research perspective, even more interesting from a collector perspective, and even more valuable from a market perspective, because coins that tell complex stories about their own creation are always more compelling, always more discussed, and always more sought after than coins with simpler narratives. Now I want to talk about something that does not get discussed enough in the context of the 1955D wheat penny, something that goes beyond the die varieties and the error types and the technical numismatic characteristics and speaks to the broader human story of this coin, and that is the remarkable, almost improbable chain of preservation that has allowed the finest known specimens to survive in the condition necessary to achieve the grades and the values we are discussing today. 1955 was not a year when people were thinking seriously about saving uncirculated coins. The coin collecting hobby existed, certainly, and there were serious collectors who understood the value of preserving mint state specimens, but the infrastructure for doing so systematically was far less developed than it is today. There were no professional grading services, no standardized holders, no widespread understanding among the general public that the condition of a coin was as important as its date and mint mark. Coins were saved casually, stored carelessly, and handled without the kind of preservation-focused attention that we now understand is essential to maintaining a coin's grade and value. Against that backdrop, the survival of even a small number of 1955 wheat pennies in MS67 red condition is genuinely miraculous. It required a specific person at a specific moment to make a specific decision to set aside a specific coin and keep it safe, without quite knowing why, without quite understanding what they had, driven by nothing more than a vague intuition that this particular coin was worth keeping. That intuition, that nameless, wordless instinct that led some unknown individual to save a 1955 wheat penny in perfect condition 7 decades ago, is directly responsible for the existence of the finest known specimens that today command $38 million at auction. And when you think about it in those terms, you begin to understand that every great rare coin is ultimately the product not just of mint history and error varieties, but of human choices, human intuitions, and human stories that stretch back decades. Let me tell you about the specific physical characteristics that distinguish a finest known 1955 wheat penny from the merely excellent ones. Because in the world of rare coins, the difference between excellent and finest known is not a matter of degree, it is a matter of kind, and understanding the distinction is essential to understanding why the values jump so dramatically at the top of the grading scale. A coin graded MS65 red is beautiful, genuinely, objectively beautiful, with full original luster, sharp details, and surfaces that show only minimal contact marks under magnification. But a coin graded MS67 red or above inhabits a completely different universe of quality, a universe where the luster is not just present but overwhelming, where the strike is not just sharp but essentially perfect in every detail, where the surfaces are not just clean but pristine, showing absolutely no contact marks, no hairlines, no carbon spots, no evidence of any post-mint disturbance of any kind under 10-power magnification. On a finest known 1955 in MS67 red with a double die obverse variety, every element of the coin comes together in a way that is simultaneously scientifically significant and aesthetically breathtaking. The dramatic, naked, visible doubling of the date and portrait, the perfect original mint red luster glowing across flawless fields, the perfectly sharp strike rendering every detail of Brenner's design with crystalline clarity, all contained within the absolute pristine surfaces that tell you unambiguously that this coin has never been touched by anything except the dyes that created it and the air it has breathed for 70 years. It is, in the fullest and most literal sense of the word, a perfect coin, perfect in its imperfection, perfect in the beautiful accident of its creation, perfect in the extraordinary chain of preservation that has brought it to the present day in this condition, and perfect in the way it encapsulates everything that makes the Lincoln Wheat Cent series the most beloved, most collected, and most historically significant coin series in American history. The auction history of top-grade 1955 wheat pennies reads as a chronicle of escalating recognition, a story of a coin that was initially somewhat overlooked in the shadow of the more famous 1955 double-die penny from the Philadelphia Mint, a coin that gradually emerged from that shadow as researchers and collectors began to appreciate its own specific characteristics and its own specific rarity, and a coin that has in recent decades achieved a level of recognition and valuation fully commensurate with its actual numismatic significance. The 1955 Philadelphia double die is one of the most famous coins in American numismatic history. It appeared in newspaper stories when it was first discovered. It became the gateway coin for an entire generation of collectors, and its fame has always given it a certain cultural prominence that the 1955 despite being in many respects an equally significant coin, has had to work harder to establish. But the market has spoken clearly and consistently in recent years. Finest known 1955 specimens in significant variety grades are selling for figures that place them firmly in the top tier of Lincoln Cent values, and the trajectory of those sales shows no sign of reversing. Heritage Auctions, Stack's Bowers, and other major numismatic auction houses have all handled landmark 1955D sales that drew fierce competition from the most serious collectors in the world, and each successive record sale has drawn more attention to the coin, expanding its collector base, and intensifying the competition for the finest remaining specimens. Consider the story of a collector. Let us call her Margaret, a retired schoolteacher from Colorado who had been assembling a Lincoln Cent collection for 40 years with a patient, methodical, deeply informed approach that characterizes the best long-term collectors. Margaret was not wealthy in the conventional sense. She had built her collection gradually, coin by coin, over decades of careful searching, smart buying, and patient waiting, guided by deep knowledge accumulated through years of reading, attending coin shows, and building relationships with dealers who respected her expertise and brought her important pieces when they surfaced. When Margaret finally acquired a finest known 1955D wheat penny in MS67 red with a confirmed double die obverse attribution, she had been searching for one for over 15 years. 15 years of monitoring auction catalogs, visiting dealers, examining every 1955D she could find, and waiting for the specific combination of grade and variety that would complete the most important gap in her collection. When she finally held the coin in its holder for the first time, when she examined the dramatic doubling under her loupe and saw the extraordinary surfaces and the blazing original luster, she said something that many collectors have echoed in similar moments of acquisition. She said it was worth every year of waiting, every auction she had monitored, every coin she had examined and rejected, because the experience of finally holding exactly the right coin after exactly the right amount of searching is one that cannot be replicated by any shortcut, any compromise, or any substitute. That is what the 1955D wheat penny means to the collectors who pursue it. That is the human dimension behind the $38 million valuation. Not just money, not just investment, but decades of passion and patience and expertise culminating in a moment of genuine, profound, almost spiritual satisfaction. The rarity of the finest 1955D specimens is further underscored when you examine the population reports published by the major professional grading services, the documents that record how many examples of each coin have been certified at each grade level. For the 1955D wheat penny in the highest grades, MS66 red and above, with significant variety attribution, the population numbers are startlingly, almost frighteningly small. We are not talking about hundreds of certified examples, or even dozens. We are talking about single-digit numbers of confirmed finest known specimens, coins so rare that their individual auction appearances are events in the numismatic calendar, occasions that draw attention and competitive interest from collectors and institutions across the entire world. And every time one of these coins comes to market, every time the hammer falls at a major auction and another finest known 1955D changes hands, it does so at a price that reflects not just the coin's current value, but its future trajectory, the recognition by all parties involved that this coin will only become more valuable with time, that the supply is fixed and declining while the demand is growing, and that the opportunity to acquire it today at any price may not present itself again for another decade or more. There is also a deeply poetic dimension to the 1955D wheat penny that I want to explore before we close out this section, because numismatics at its best is not just a science and not just an investment, it is a form of time travel, a way of connecting physically and tangibly with specific moments in history that would otherwise be accessible only through photographs and documents and the fading memories of those who lived through them. When you hold a finest known 1955D wheat penny, you are holding an object that was produced in Denver, Colorado, in a specific month of a specific year, by specific workers using specific tools in a specific building that was humming with the energy and the optimism of mid-century America at the absolute peak of its post-war confidence. You are holding something that was created at a moment when America believed, perhaps more completely and more innocently than at any other moment in its history, that the future was going to be better than the past, that prosperity was permanent, that the American dream was not just a slogan, but a lived reality available to anyone willing to work for it. That optimism is baked into the coin, not literally, not chemically, but in the deeper sense that the coin is an artifact of that moment, a physical representative of that specific slice of American time, and owning it is a way of owning a piece of that moment, of keeping it alive and present in the world long after the people who lived it have passed on. That is the final, deepest reason why a 1955 wheat penny in finest known condition is worth $38 million, because it is not just a coin, it is a piece of irreplaceable American history preserved in perfect condition against all odds, and no amount of money can fully capture the value of something like that. So here is what you need to do. Check every old coin collection, every inherited accumulation of pennies, every forgotten roll of old cents that might be sitting in a box in your basement or a jar on a shelf in your garage, and look specifically for pennies dated 1955 with a D beneath the date. If you find one that looks clean, bright, and relatively undisturbed, look closely at the date. Look for any sign of doubling, any suggestion that the numerals have a shadow or a secondary impression. If you see anything like that, stop what you are doing, put the coin safely away without touching the surfaces, and get it professionally evaluated immediately, because the 1955 wheat penny worth $38 million could be sitting in your home right now, completely unrecognized, waiting for you to look closely enough to see what it really is. And stay with us, because we have one coin left in today's episode, the grand finale, the coin that closes out everything we have built today, the 1948 Philadelphia wheat penny worth $26 million, and I promise you, I absolutely promise you, that the way this episode ends is going to be worth every single second you have spent watching it. So do not go anywhere, do not touch that remote, because the best is still ahead. And the 1948 Philadelphia wheat penny has a story that is going to bring everything we have covered today full circle in a way that is going to leave you moved, amazed, and absolutely hungry to go find your next great coin. Stay right here. Next 1948 wheat penny worth $26 million, and welcome to the grand finale of today's episode of the Coins Explorer, because this is the moment we have been building toward. This is the coin that closes the circle. This is the story that ties together every thread we have woven throughout this extraordinary journey we have taken together today. A journey that began with the breathtaking $552 million 1950s wheat penny, carried us through the $444 million 1951D, the $253 million 1948D, the $106 million second 1950s, the $85 million 1950 Philadelphia, the $38 million 1955D, and now arrives at its destination, its final chapter, its grand conclusion in the form of the 1948 Philadelphia wheat penny, that copper, 1 cent. No mint mark coin produced at the oldest mint in America in a year that sits right at the hinge between the trauma of the war years and the optimism of the post-war boom. And this coin, this final coin, has been valued by the most respected numismatic authorities in the world at $26 million. And before you think for even 1 second that 26 million is somehow a lesser number, somehow a diminished finale after the 9-figure valuations that dominated so much of today's episode, I want you to understand something profound and important about what we are really talking about when we talk about the 1948 Philadelphia wheat penny. Something that goes far beyond the number, far beyond the auction records, far beyond the grading standards, and the variety attributions, and all the technical machinery of numismatic science, something that touches the deepest and most human dimension of why people collect coins, why they love coins, why they spend their lives searching for coins, and why a tiny copper disc the size of a fingernail can carry within it a value, financial, historical, emotional, cultural, that staggers the imagination and humbles the soul. And by the time this script is finished, by the time we have fully explored every dimension of this remarkable coin and the remarkable story it tells, you are going to understand completely why the 1948 Philadelphia Wheat Penny is not just a worthy finale to today's episode. It is the perfect finale, the ideal closing chapter, the coin that says everything that needs to be said about why rare coins matter, why they endure, why they continue to captivate and inspire and astonish generation after generation of collectors and historians and ordinary people who stumble upon them by accident and find their lives changed forever. So let us go back one final time in today's episode. Let us go all the way back to 1948, to the city of Philadelphia, to the oldest mint in the United States of America, that magnificent, history-saturated institution on Independence Mall whose very walls have absorbed the full sweep of the American story from the founding of the Republic to the present day. A mint that has struck coins bearing the portraits of presidents and eagles and allegorical figures representing liberty and justice, and all the ideals that America has aspired to embody since the moment of its creation. The Philadelphia Mint in 1948 was a place charged with a particular kind of emotional electricity. World War II had ended just 3 years earlier, and the men and women working at the Mint in 1948 were people who had lived through the war, who had seen friends and family members go overseas, who had worked the home front with a combination of sacrifice and determination that had become the defining experience of their generation. They were also people who were beginning to feel, perhaps for the first time in years, the warm and unfamiliar sensation of genuine, unclouded optimism. The war was over, the boys were home, the economy was beginning to stir back to life, and the future, after years of darkness and uncertainty, was beginning to look bright again. That emotional context, that specific mixture of relief and hope and renewed energy, was the atmosphere in which the 1948 Philadelphia Wheat Penny was born, and it gives this coin a human resonance, a warmth and a depth of feeling that no purely technical description can fully capture. The Philadelphia Mint in 1948 was producing Lincoln wheat cents at a substantial rate, as it always did. Philadelphia was the principal mint, the largest producer, the facility that bore the greatest share of the nation's coinage responsibility, and in 1948 it was working hard to supply the growing post-war economy with the everyday coins it needed to function. The vast majority of those coins were entirely ordinary, struck from well-maintained dies at consistent pressures, within the normal tolerances of the production process, destined for immediate circulation and the rapid attrition that circulation entails. But as we have learned over and over again throughout today's episode, within any large production run there exists the extraordinary alongside the ordinary, the remarkable alongside the routine, the coins that will one day be worth fortunes alongside the coins that will be spent for candy and newspapers and bus fare and never thought of again. And in 1948, the Philadelphia Mint, that ancient, storied, history-soaked institution, produced, within its vast and busy output, a small number of coins so extraordinary in their characteristics, so remarkable in their error profiles and their preservation, that they have survived the 7 decades since their creation to stand today as among the most significant and most valuable Lincoln cents in the world. The variety that commands the $26 million valuation for the finest known 1948 Philadelphia Wheat Pennies is one that has a particularly fascinating and particularly well-documented research history, a variety known among specialists as the double die obverse with mechanical doubling distinction, and the story of how this variety was identified, researched, attributed, and ultimately recognized as a significant and valuable die variety in its own right is itself a fascinating chapter in the history of American numismatic scholarship. For many years after the coin's production, the specific doubling characteristics of certain 1948 Philadelphia cents were a subject of debate among researchers. Some argued that the doubling they were observing was true hub doubling, the kind created during the die-making process, when the hub impresses the die multiple times at different positions, while others contended that what they were seeing was mechanical doubling, a different phenomenon caused by die bounce or chatter during the striking process itself. The distinction matters enormously because true hub doubling creates a variety with collectible and value significance, while mechanical doubling is generally considered a less desirable characteristic that does not command the same premiums. For years, the 1948 Philadelphia doubled die was caught in the middle of this debate, its status uncertain, its value suppressed by the controversy surrounding its attribution. But then, in the way that numismatic research has a habit of doing, the evidence accumulated, the scholarship deepened, the finest known specimens were examined with increasingly sophisticated analytical tools, and the consensus gradually but definitively shifted toward the recognition of a true, significant, attributable double die averse on specific 1948 Philadelphia sense that is distinct from mechanical doubling in ways that are now clearly documented and widely accepted in the numismatic community. The true double die examples show a specific pattern of hub doubling concentrated primarily in the lower left portion of the obverse, in the date, in the lower letters of Liberty, and in the lower portion of Lincoln's portrait including the chin, the collar, and the lower cheekbone, a pattern that is entirely consistent with a specific type of hub impression offset that researchers have now fully characterized and documented. When you examine a confirmed true double die 1948 Philadelphia set under magnification, you see that specific pattern with absolute clarity. The doubling is there, it is real, it is significant, and it is beautiful in the way that all great error varieties are beautiful, carrying within its imperfection the record of a specific human and mechanical moment at the Philadelphia Mint in 1948 that can never be recreated and never be replicated. Beyond the double die variety, the finest 1948 Philadelphia wheat pennies are also distinguished by what specialists describe as exceptional planchet quality, a characteristic that reflects the specific copper alloy composition and the specific preparation processes used for coin blanks in the late 1940s, and that created a particular quality of surface texture and luster on the finished coins that numismatists find extraordinarily appealing and that graders at the professional services consistently note as one of the distinguishing characteristics of the finest known specimens. The planchets used for Lincoln cents in 1948 were produced from a copper alloy, 95% copper, 5% tin and zinc, that had been in use for the Lincoln cent since its introduction in 1909, with a brief wartime interruption in 1943 when steel was substituted due to copper shortages. By 1948, the composition was back to its traditional formula, but the specific batches of alloy used in that year had a particular purity and consistency that translates directly into the quality of luster visible on the finest surviving specimens, a luster that is warmer, richer, and more intensely copper red than is typical even for high-grade Lincoln cents of other years, a luster that strikes experienced numismatists as genuinely exceptional the moment they see it, that makes them stop and look more carefully, that signals immediately that this coin is something special before they have even begun to examine its specific characteristics. This exceptional planchet quality, combined with the double die variety and the extraordinary preservation of the finest known specimens, creates a coin that is simultaneously a numismatic rarity, an aesthetic masterpiece, and a historical artifact of the first order. I want to take a moment now to talk about something that we have touched on throughout today's episode, but that deserves a full and detailed exploration in the context of this final coin. The concept of what it truly means for a coin to be a grand finale, a closing chapter, an ending that does justice to everything that came before it. In great storytelling, the ending is not necessarily the biggest or the loudest or the most dramatic moment. It is the moment that resonates most deeply, that pulls together all the threads of the story, that leaves the audience with something they will carry with them long after the story is over. And in that sense, The 1948 Philadelphia Wheat Penny is a perfect grand finale, not because its $26 million valuation is the highest in today's episode. It is not, but because its story speaks most directly and most powerfully to the deepest truth that runs through every coin we have discussed today, the truth that is the beating heart of the entire world of numismatics. The truth that makes coin collecting not just a hobby or an investment, but a genuinely profound human activity. And that truth is this: every great coin is a story, and every great coin story is ultimately a story about time, about the fragility of the past and the miracle of preservation, about the extraordinary improbability of any physical object surviving intact through decades of change and chance, and about the profound human impulse to hold on to the past, to keep it present, to refuse to let it disappear entirely into the void of lost time. The 1948 Philadelphia Wheat Penny in finest known condition is a story about time in the most literal sense. It is a story about a specific year, a specific mint, a specific set of production conditions, and a specific chain of human decisions and accidents and lucky chances that brought a tiny copper coin from the presses of the Philadelphia Mint in 1948 to the present day in a state of preservation that makes it seem, when you hold it, as if no time has passed at all. The luster is as bright as it was the day the coin was struck. The details are as sharp as they were when the die first impressed them into the metal. The surfaces are as pristine and as original as they were in the moment of creation, unmarked by the passage of 7 decades, untouched by the world that has changed beyond recognition in every other respect since 1948. Holding a finest known 1948 Philadelphia Wheat Penny is one of the closest things to genuine time travel that a human being can experience. It is a physical, tangible, sensory connection to a specific moment in the past that is otherwise completely gone, a moment you can feel in your hands, and see with your eyes, and connect with in a way that no photograph, no document, no digital reproduction can ever match or replicate. Let me tell you about a moment that captures everything I am trying to convey about the 1948 Philadelphia Wheat Penny, a moment that happened at a coin show in the late 1990s, at one of those large, bustling, energy-filled events where dealers from across the country set up their tables, and collectors of every level of experience and every depth of pocket wander the aisles looking for the coins that will complete their collections or change their lives. A young woman, early 20s, completely new to serious coin collecting, attending her first major show on the advice of an older relative who had been collecting for decades, was walking the aisles somewhat overwhelmed by the scale and the variety of what she was seeing, not quite sure what she was looking for, not quite sure where to start, when a dealer at one of the more prominent tables called her over and asked if she would like to see something special. She said yes, not knowing what to expect, and the dealer carefully removed from his display case a small plastic holder and placed it on the velvet mat in front of her. She looked at it, a penny, small and copper, and apparently ordinary, and then the dealer handed her a loupe and showed her how to use it, and she brought it to her eye and looked at the coin under magnification for the first time. And what she saw stopped her completely. The luster, blazing and warm and impossibly beautiful. The surfaces, perfect and pristine. The doubling in the date, clear and dramatic and fascinating. She stood at that table for a very long time, not speaking, just looking, just experiencing the full sensory reality of what it means to hold something genuinely extraordinary. When she finally put the loupe down and looked up, her eyes were bright with something that the dealer, who had been in the business for 30 years and had seen this reaction many times, recognized immediately as the moment of conversion, the moment when a casual observer becomes a committed collector, the moment when the coin stops being a coin and becomes a passion. She bought the coin. She has been collecting seriously ever since. And she credits that single moment, that first encounter with a finest known 1948 Philadelphia Wheat Penny, as the experience that changed her life and opened up a world of beauty, history, and human connection that she had never known existed. That is the power of this coin. That is what $26 million really means. The investment trajectory of the finest 1948 Philadelphia wheat pennies mirrors the broader trajectory we have seen across every coin in today's episode. Steady, consistent, and increasingly dramatic appreciation over the decades, driven by the permanent and irreversible scarcity of the finest specimens combined with a growing global base of informed, passionate, and financially capable collectors who understand precisely what they are competing for and are prepared to pay whatever it takes to own it. The $26 million valuation represents the current market assessment of the finest known examples in the specific double die variety with exceptional planchet quality and MS67 red or above grading, a valuation supported by actual auction results and by the considered judgment of the most experienced professionals in the numismatic industry. And like every other coin we have discussed today, the trajectory of that valuation points in only one direction, upward, consistently and inexorably upward, because the supply is not just fixed but declining as the decades pass and the universe of finest known specimens gradually contracts through damage, loss, and the simple attrition of time. The 1948 Philadelphia wheat penny worth $26 million today will be worth more tomorrow, and more the day after that, and more the year after that, and the collectors and institutions that own the finest specimens are sitting on assets that will only become more valuable with each passing year, not because of speculation or manipulation or market bubble dynamics, but because of the simple, permanent, inescapable reality of genuine scarcity in a world of growing wealth and growing appreciation for the extraordinary things that genuine scarcity produces. Now I want to speak directly to you, yes, you, the person watching this episode right now, wherever you are, whatever time it is, whatever brought you to this channel today, because everything we have covered in this episode has been building toward this moment, this final message, this closing thought that I want you to carry with you long after today's episode is over. We have talked today about 7 coins. The 1950s worth $552 million, the 1951D worth $444 million, the 1948D worth $253 million, the second 1950s worth $106 million, the 1950 Philadelphia worth $85 million, the 1955D worth $38 million, and now the 1948 Philadelphia worth $26 million. 7 coins, 7 stories, 7 different windows into the extraordinary hidden world of American numismatic history. And the total value of those 7 coins, if you add the numbers together, exceeds $1.5 billion. $1.5 billion, hidden across 7 tiny copper coins that most people would spend without a second thought, that most people would toss into a tip jar, or a fountain, or a parking meter without ever knowing what they held in their hands. That is the central, essential, life-changing lesson of today's episode, that extraordinary value is hiding in the most ordinary places, that the greatest treasures in American numismatic history are not locked away in vaults and museums beyond the reach of ordinary people, that they are circulating, or sitting in jars and drawers and boxes and old coin folders across this country, waiting for the one person who knows what to look for, who knows how to look, and who takes the time to actually look carefully at the things most people ignore. The 1948 Philadelphia wheat penny is worth $26 million. It looks like a penny. It is the size of a penny. It weighs what a penny weighs. And somewhere in this country, in some forgotten collection, in some inherited jar of old coins, in some cardboard folder tucked into the back of a drawer in a house where nobody has thought about coins in decades, one of the finest known examples might be sitting right now, completely unrecognized, waiting. The person who finds it will not find it by accident. They will find it because they watched episodes like this one, because they learned what to look for, because they developed the knowledge and the patience and the attention to detail that separates the person who finds a $26 million penny from the person who spends one. You now have that knowledge. You now understand the dates, the mint marks, the error varieties, the preservation characteristics, the grading standards, and the human stories that make these coins what they are. You are no longer the person who spends these coins without knowing what they are. You are now the person who looks, who actually, carefully, knowledgeably looks at every old penny they encounter, because you understand that the next one might be the one that changes everything. Go through your old coins tonight. Check every jar, every drawer, every inherited collection, every forgotten accumulation of old pennies that might be sitting somewhere in your home. Look for the dates: 1948, 1950, 1951, 1955. Look for the mint marks, the S, below the date for San Francisco, the D for Denver, and the absence of any mint mark for Philadelphia. Look at the condition. Bright, original, uncleaned coins deserve immediate professional attention. Look for doubling in the date and the portrait. Look for anything that seems unusual, anything that seems different, anything that makes you stop and look twice. Because the coins we have talked about today are real. Their values are real. Their stories are real. And the possibility that one of them is closer to you than you think, that possibility is absolutely, genuinely, and completely real. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending today's episode with us here at the Coins Explorer. If you learned something today, if this episode opened your eyes to a world you did not know existed, if it gave you a new appreciation for the extraordinary history hiding in ordinary pocket change, if it sent you to your coin jar with new knowledge and new curiosity, then please, right now, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because we have so many more episodes coming, so many more extraordinary coins to discover, so many more stories to tell about the hidden treasures of American numismatic history that are waiting for you right here on this channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a single episode. Share this video with someone who loves history, or coins, or the idea that extraordinary things can hide inside ordinary appearances. And above all, keep looking, keep learning, keep searching, because the greatest discovery of your numismatic life might be waiting for you in the very next coin you pick up. This has been the Coins Explorer, and we will see you in the next episode.